Happy Friday, second hour of the show here on One Bills Live. Chris Brown, Steve Tasker, and joined to talk some more draft with senior producer from NFL Films, Greg Cosell. And we're going to go over another defensive position, knowing it's probably going to be a defensive-heavy draft for the Bills. And to the safety position we go. Greg, how are you?
Gentlemen, what's happening?
We're plowing through position by position, and we have you to help us, so thank goodness for that.
You and me both, Brownie. You and me both.
And one guy that, you talk about first-round draft choices and elite physical traits. Nick Emmanwori has him in spades. So we know that much we know. What we need to know from you is his game. What do you see there?
Yeah, he's my favorite safety in the draft. I mean, I think he's a multi-dimensional prospect. He's got, as you basically just said, he's got an unbelievable size speed profile. I mean, he ran a 4.38 at 6'3 and 1/8, 220 pounds. He can play in the box. He can play over the slot. He can play on the back end. I think he can play in two high safety structures. I think he can play as a post safety at times. He probably played more of a strong safety type role at South Carolina, but he had an incredible number of solo tackles, which you don't see very often from safeties, solo tackles. I think he's a really high-level prospect. I think if you're going to play quarters coverage, he'd be a phenomenal quarter safety. I think if you want to play big nickel, he can be part of a three safety package. He could align in the box as a linebacker in dime packages, as we've seen the Bills do, over the last couple of years. We saw them do that with Rapp a number of times, where he played in the box when they went dime. So, I think Emmanwori, to me, is the best safety prospect in this draft class.
And certainly when you're talking about it, the other name that comes into the conversation is Malaki Starks.
Yeah, and Starks, I think, is a different player. He's not a great athlete. He's a good athlete. He's not a great athlete. Clearly at Georgia, he was deployed in a multi-positional and multi-dimensional way. To me, and maybe I'll be dead wrong, and others could disagree, and that's okay. I see him more as a Jesse Bates style of player. He's more of a back end player. He's got smooth, fluid movement. He's got transition traits on the back end. I think he did show physicality and aggression to run the alley and be a factor in the run game and make tackles. But I saw him more as that kind of player as opposed to a true, I don't think he can do as much for a defense as Emmanwori can do. And he's certainly not as big. And I would say he's not quite the athlete Emmanwori is.
Yeah, a center fielder primarily. That's kind of him, right?
To some degree. Yeah, I mean, obviously those guys play in two high safety structures as well, but I see him more as a back end safety. Yes.
Yeah, and from everything we've heard, one of the cleanest prospects in the draft in terms of background and character wise too. One guy that there seems to be a little bit of mixed opinion on is Andrew Mukuba from Texas. I don't know if that's due in part to his size. I thought he tested well enough, but you tell me.
Yeah, I think it's the size, Brownie. He was 186 at the combine. I mean, he's a really good football player. For people who follow college football closely, they may remember as a true freshman at Clemson, he came right in and was a really, really impactful player. Played 3 years at Clemson, finished his career at Texas this past year. I mean, he's twitchy. He's got sudden athleticism. He's decisive with his reactions. He's a really smooth athlete. I mean, he will come down in the run game, and he's physical. Now, he's not strong. He's only 186 pounds, but he is physical. So you have to decide how you feel about the 186 pounds. To me, that is going to be the main issue with him, because he's a really good football player, and that's going to be the conversation. Can I live with a guy who's 186 as a safety who, if I want him to come down and, be truly a factor in the run game, maybe play in the box at times, can he do that? But he's super aggressive, super competitive. There'll be no problem with him wanting to do that. He's willing. He's very willing to be aggressive and competitive. It's just the weight. You don't see a lot of safeties at 186 these days.
That is true. And I even noted it in my notes because I agree with you. He plays a very physical style, and you wonder if teams get concerned that 186-pound safety that plays that physical, is he going to miss games because he may not hold up, going against bigger, stronger, faster players in the league? Do you think that's a valid concern for teams to have?
Yes, absolutely. And look, sometimes it all works out, but it's a legitimate concern, even as a tackler, because, will he be one of those guys that, hey, in college it worked, but in the NFL with bigger players, does he become a drag down guy that ends up giving up 3, 4, 5 extra yards because, he has to drag guys down as opposed to truly tackle them? So that's a very legitimate question. And I think that'll be discussed. But he's a fun guy to watch. He's a really good player. It's just he's incredibly light for a safety in today's NFL.
All right, we gotta reset this conversation before we get down. We've got a whole list of safeties we're going to talk about, but I got to remind all of us where we were at this time 12 months ago. Because last year we were talking about the other side of the ball at wide receiver. You had Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors, Roma Dunze, Brian Thomas Jr. Then you got down to the, all that stuff would happen with Xavier Worthy and Xavier Legette, and then the Bills take Keon Coleman after trading down. Where are these safeties going to fall in this draft board? Because are the Bills going to have a chance at Nick Emmanwori at 30? There's no way.
Not to my way of thinking. Again, this is going to be an odd draft, Steve, in my view, because, you don't have 4 or 5 quarterbacks at the top of the draft. You probably don't have those, 4 or 5 receivers that everybody's excited about, wide receivers. So I think this is a really hard draft to mock. I don't do that anyway, but I think it's a really hard draft to do that with. I think you'll see guys taken in the first round that some people think are the 50th best prospect. I think you'll see guys taken at 50 that a lot of people said, oh, this guy's a top 25 player. So that's hard to know. I'd be very surprised if Emmanwori was there at 30, but, who knows?
Yeah.
Right.
Another guy, Xavier Watts from Notre Dame, recruited as a wide receiver, plays linebacker, then transitions to safety. How much do you believe that helps him in a league that's moving to more 3 safety sub packages?
Yeah, Watts is a really interesting guy. I mean, he's scheme diverse because he can line up on the back end. He can play the post. He can play in 2 high structures. He can play at the second level with his background, and he played in the slot quite a bit and matched up to both tight ends and wide receivers. It's funny, as I've mentioned probably before, when I watch players, I don't necessarily spend 20 minutes after I finish watching thinking who they remind me of. Sometimes a guy just pops into my head and I think stylistically, oh, they remind me of this guy. And the guy that Watts kind of reminded me of, and this is when guys come out of college, by the way, not once they're in their NFL career. The guy he kind of reminded me of, Brownie, was Xavier McKinney when he came out of Alabama.
Oh, wow.
Because McKinney played safety and then he played slot. And I just think Watts to me is a really good player. I think he's I could make an argument, and like I said, reasonable people can disagree. Maybe Chris Trapasso would disagree, but I kind of like Watts more than I like Starks, but that's just me.
Well, it's a better physical build for sure. There's more versatility, so I would understand why you would feel that way. Here's a bonus question. This is a guy that's a former receiver, so he has good hands. He has 13 interceptions in his last 2 seasons at Notre Dame. From the film you saw, how many did he luck into, and how many were him anticipating and making the right reads and coming up with takeaways?
I would say it's probably, it's a bit of both. I mean, the thing that I love, and this is just an aside, is when people say things like he's always around the ball, because I'm not sure where else he's supposed to be. I mean, if he's playing post safety and the quarterback overthrows the receiver and he hits him, right in the 0, that's his number. Where is he supposed to be in the parking lot? Where is he supposed to be? Right. He's playing post safety and the ball's overthrown, but I'd say he also has interceptions where he makes the play. And he's got really good hands. That's the thing. I mean, he's got really good hands. The one we're looking at right now is an example where he played the coverage really, really well. and therefore was in perfect position to intercept a ball that, of course, the quarterback never should have thrown, but he was in perfect position to do so. So I really like this player. To me, he's going to be an ascending player because he hasn't played a ton of safety. He's still learning how to play the position. I think he's physically put together. I wouldn't call him an explosive athlete, but how many safeties are really twitchy, sudden, explosive athletes? There's not that many who are like that.
And I'll say this, though. I don't know how well he tested physically at the combine. I guess
he didn't run there.
Yeah,
he got a 4.56 at his pro day.
Yeah, he's just an okay athlete. But for me, and I don't know how you feel about this because it's hard to quantify. So a lot of guys don't want to evaluate this because you don't know what kind of the safety spot is a neck up position.
I agree.
You play it between your ears, and so the athleticism or lack thereof isn't not as big a red flag for that spot as it is, say, a corner.
And I would say, Steve, and again, I've had this conversation. Everybody has this conversation at this time of year once we start getting 40 times from players. I think that when you watch his tape, and obviously I watched him last summer because in 2023 he led the nation in interceptions. And then, of course, I watched him this year from his 2024 tape, Notre Dame having the great year being in the national championship game. And I think people understand this, but he plays faster than his time speed. And that could be a function just of what you said, Steve, that he sees things quickly. He's got a really quick trigger. And then the play recognition is really good. He looks like a more explosive athlete on tape than his 40 time would indicate.
All right, so let's go to Penn State here. Kevin Winston, unfortunately, suffers the injury, torn ACL in September, but was a highly touted prospect. And, here's a guy that gets his last season before the NFL cut short. What do you think of his body of work? I know the word on him is he's a pretty instinctive player.
Yeah, I watched him last summer, thankfully. So fortunately, my work was done on him because he played, I think, a game and a quarter this year. He's a big kid, 6'1.5", 215. I think his tape shows from last year a higher level safety prospect. I mean, this guy can play on the back end. He can play a post safety. He can play in a two shell structure. He can play in the box. He can match up man to man on tight ends, whether they're attached or detached. There were times he matched up on wide receivers. I think he's a rangy mover. He's got great length, great play speed. He looked really fast and furious on tape. I mean, is there a little tightness in his hips because he's high cut and long legged? A little bit, but that didn't bother me to the point where I thought it would be a problem. I mean, this guy's long and athletic. I think he's a really, really good prospect.
What about his teammate, Jaylen Reed? He got a lot more playing time this year because Winston was off the field and had to carry more of the load on the back end. I was watching him. He's a feisty player.
Yeah, he was actually. I wouldn't put him in the category, of the top guys, but he was a very fun player to watch. The first thing you notice, Brownie, and you probably noticed it, is how versatile he is. How many positions they line him up in. And to me, I think that tells you that he's a smart player because you guys know there's no coach who is going to line up a guy in 3 or 4 different positions if they don't trust him to be able to do that. So to me, that says that this guy is a pretty smart player who's capable of playing on all 3 levels of the defense and do his job. He's another guy that has a very quick trigger. He plays with urgency. He plays with aggression. Not a great athlete. You wouldn't call him a great athlete, but I think that, and I always hate to use the word instinctive because it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but I think he sort of sees things well. He's really aggressive playing downhill in the run game. I think that, on the back end, I think he's fluid enough. I think he can transition and change direction. I like this kid a lot. One player he kind of reminded me of to some degree, and I think this guy's been a really good player, is he kind of reminded me of Justin Reed, who was with the Chiefs, and I know he just signed somewhere else. I can't remember where, but he kind of reminded me of Justin Reed because Jaylen Reed is pretty big. He's almost 6 feet and 211. And by the way, for whatever it means, he ran a 4.49, which I think was better than a lot of people thought he would run.
Yeah.
Yeah, that weight and that size, he's the guy, the physicality, the physical specimen you want. Can't be any taller and bigger, yeah, sure, but he's plenty heavy enough and runs fast enough and brings enough mass to the run game that you could play him up to the line of scrimmage in the box. And you're right. I think it says a lot when you watch the film, and you got to look before every snap as to where is he lining up now.
Where is he? Yeah, I hate those guys, Steve, because then you got
I
to
know.
find them before every play, you know?
So you got to run the
It
play.
takes longer to watch the tape.
You run the play, and then you got to go. Okay, there
Yeah, I
he is.
know.
Now you got to follow him
There
back
he
to
is.
the
You run the
beginning.
play, and it's like, oh, there he is, and then you got to go back and watch it 4 times.
Right. Yeah.
All right. What about the Ohio State prospect, Lathan Ransom? You know, there's so much talent on that Ohio State roster, and it's kind of hard to make your mark sometimes.
You know what? Those are the kinds of teams when it gets to the draft, Brownie, that I freaking hate, because I have to watch their tape like 3-4 times, because you can't watch 8 guys at one time or 9 guys. You can't even watch it in 2 times. So, you know, I hate those teams. But Ransom is a fascinating guy, because this guy is a downhill striker. I mean, this guy plays downhill. There's not a lot of mystery to his game. I mean, what he was asked to do at Ohio State was clearly defined. So now the question is he a sort of a role and scheme specific player as you project and transition him to the next level? He may be the most aggressive downhill run defender in this safety draft class. I mean, he's got a quick trigger. He tackles with force in the box. He's a physical striker. He can flow and track down runners. I've learned a lot about quarters, cover 4, and what they ask their safeties to do in the run game, and he strikes me as a cover 4 safety. You know, he's not a back-end safety. He's not a guy you'd play in the post. I mean, obviously, nobody does the same thing on every play, so could he play in the post a couple of times? Sure, but that's not what he is. You know, and what he brings to a defense is a physical mentality and swagger, and you know every defensive coordinator loves that. But you have to understand what he is and what he isn't. But what he is, he's very, very good at.
Yeah, I liked how they would often deploy him as like a delayed blitzer.
Yeah.
Like, you know, whether he was spying or whether it's just like, all right, hang out, watch the quarterback, and now go get him when he, you know, when they're just when you can trigger, and man, when he triggers, you see it.
Yeah.
And you, unlike Jaylen Reed, who you sort of had to find sometimes, you knew where he was, and as soon as the play started, it was like, oh, there's Ransom, because he just played fast.
Yeah,
he just triggered. He saw it, and he was gone.
Yeah, definitely plays with an edge for sure. So, you know, the safety class, I don't think it's getting as much pub as maybe some of the other positions, but I think you could find some guys here that can help you, you know, as late as round 3, maybe even early day 3.
Yeah, Sanker's an interesting guy, too, from Virginia. He's a big kid. You know, he's another guy that played in multiple spots in the context of their defense.
Yep.
Yeah, I think he's a pretty good prospect as well. You know,
I like the Navy kid a little bit, too.
What's that?
I like the Navy kid a little bit, too, the Lane kid.
Yeah, I haven't seen him, so I can't speak to him. So you're ahead of me in that.
Day 3 player, but I liked him.
Yeah. You know, the thing, and I love what Steve said, because he's so right. I mean, the safety position so much is above the neck. And, you know, I think, you know, sure, you always want a great athlete. I mean, we all know that. You know, I remember a scout telling me years and years ago when I was first going to the combine, you know, and this goes back to probably the late 90s when I first started going to the scouting combine, and he was joking around, but it just stuck me, and he had that great Southern accent. He said, you know, you always would prefer big and fast to small and slow. You know, I mean, you always want a great athlete, but sometimes you can be a great safety without being a great athlete.
Yeah. Truer words have never been spoken.
Yeah.
Greg, thanks as always. We will catch up with you next week with the latest position group, TBD.